all the thick and thin of the Whalers' first memorable season in Hartford, one moment really stands out. A moment Hartford people were looking forward to since the first insurance policy was ever written. A moment Whaler people were looking forward to since the first puck was ever dropped. Opening night, January 11th, 1975. A new home, a new identity. It was the New England Whalers versus the San Diego Mariners. But the opponent didn't really matter. You could have brought in Charlie Brown's All-Stars to play the Whalers that night. Yes, the Hartford Civic Center was open. Major League Hockey was here at last, and it happened just like this.
A very pleasant good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this beautiful new home of your New England Whalers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a moment that we've all been waiting for, the opportunity to meet and greet your New England Whalers.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hello there, everybody. How you doing? My name is Tim Hanlon, and this is Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast journey each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. I'm ecstatic that you've come once again to download our little show into your earbuds and give us a listen. We appreciate your doing so, and we got a treat for you this week. This is time to go back into hockey, and we're back into the world of the World Hockey Association of the early 1970s. And it is our special privilege this week to talk to one of the original owners of that league, circa 1971, 1972. His name is Howard Baldwin, and that clip that you just heard was from the franchise that he founded and brought into this fledgling league. Started as the New England Whalers. They played in Boston for a couple of their first season and a half, almost 2 seasons. But as you heard in that clip from, January 11th, 1975, made the move for various reasons, which we'll get into in our conversation coming up, from Boston, where they were, kind of the second or third or even fourth tier tenant in the Boston Garden and the Boston Arena and some of the other places. A couple of games out in Springfield, of all places. They did find their home, didn't they, in the Hartford Civic Center, newly constructed, and an arena just looking for a quality tenant and a team, frankly, looking for a quality home. And boy, oh boy, a match was made in heaven beginning on that date. And that's the clip that you just heard. That was actually from an album. I apologize for not knowing who the announcer was or is, and just exactly how that album get out there. But it was it was a recap of the very first season in Hartford, which was really begun almost mid-season in January of 75. Obviously, the season started in late 1974, but that's a commemorative album that was recorded. There's a whole bunch of fun stuff on that album, by the way, including an amazing brawl, and I'm just so happy. You should be happy that I didn't regale you with some of the audio clips from that. In April of 75, there was just a Donnybrook and then some between the New England Whalers in Hartford and the Minnesota, living up to their name, Fighting Saints. I know you got to search that up on YouTube. The fight there, the clip on that is it's amazing how long it lasted, and it's just unbelievable. But it really tells you something about the WHA and all its feistiness and the craziness around it, the stories and the challenge it really was to the National Hockey League. And our guest this week, Howard Baldwin, was one of those chief instigators. He and Dennis Murphy and friends sort of helped create the collective that became the World Hockey Association. Howard going on to become the actual league president as the years wore on, and was arguably the chief architect of what ultimately became, depending on who you ask, the merger or the absorption or the expansion, shall we say, of the NHL to include 4 of the World Hockey Association teams that were remaining, one of which, of course, was the New England Whalers, and they become, of course, the Hartford Whalers upon their entry into the NHL. But Howard Baldwin's story is far beyond just that, and actually his autobiography is a real treat. It's called Slim and None: My Wild Ride from the WHA to the NHL, which we'll get to, and all the way to Hollywood. We'll also get to that too. It is an amazing story of not only being a great hockey founder and owner and administrator, but also one of becoming a well-known and well-regarded producer in Hollywood of great movies. And you'll hear from Howard in a few minutes. He's still at it. A couple of movies in the hopper with his wife/partner out in Los Angeles. It's just an amazing story that all began really kind of professionally for the first couple of his youthful first adult years in the World Hockey Association. We're going to get into all of that stuff with our very special guest, Howard Baldwin, coming up in just a couple of minutes. And we appreciate your sticking around for that great conversation. And boy, oh boy, our sponsors this week really are absolutely appropriate for this episode, because if you're into the WHA, as a lot of our listeners are, we've got 3, count them, great places to find tremendous WHA garb, wear, T-shirts, as well as jerseys from all of these 3 places. And far be it for me to say which of these places and which of these shirts and jerseys and logos are the best or better of the lot. I'm going to give you 3 great opportunities and places to check them out from these great sponsors. And I got promo codes for all of them. And you tell me which you like and where you hopefully can find something that you're interested in. But why don't you check out all the WHA gear and garb at these fine places. Streaker Sports, our friends streakersports.com has an amazing collection of WHA T-shirts and as well as all kinds of other sports. And check them out. And at streakersports.com, make sure you use the promo code GOODSEATS, and you're going to get 10% off all of your purchases when you go check them out. And let's see, we've got some Denver Spurs in there. We got the Minnesota Fighting Saints T-shirt. We got some really, the Ottawa Nationals, the Jersey Knights, the Vancouver Blazers. They're all in there. And of course, the New England Whalers are represented as well with a beautiful 1972 version of their T-shirt. Again, that's streakersports.com, promo code GOODSEATS, and you will get 10% off all of your purchases there. Let's see. You could also try 503 Sports. That's 503-sports.com. And there you're going to find a whole bunch of not only WHA T-shirts. Let's see. I see Chicago Cougars there. There's an LA Sharks shirt there. We've got the WHA Hall of Fame T-shirt in there. We got the Birmingham Bulls in there. We got all kinds of stuff, but also some hats. I see some Cincinnati Stingers hats there. I see a Michigan Stags hoodie. And we also have an Indianapolis Racers jersey from 1978. All of those things and more you will find at 503 Sports. That's 503-sports.com, the king of throwbacks, they call themselves. And the promo code there is SEATS, and you're going to get 10% off all of your purchases there. That's 503 Sports, 503-sports.com. And of course, last but certainly not least, are our friends at oldschoolshirts.com. And oldschoolshirts.com, you will find an incredible trove of high-quality T-shirts and some great pricing on some of those as well. There at oldschoolshirts.com, you're going to find some really cool WHA stuff. You find it not only an Indianapolis Racers shirt there, but you find the old logo and the sort of the fight theme there, Positive Waves, on a really cool gray shirt with a distressed-looking Indianapolis Racers logo with the logo there. It says Positive Waves on it. It's very cool. I don't think I've seen it anywhere else. You've got Phoenix Roadrunner shirt there. You've got Cleveland Barons represented. And again, of course, we've got another New England Whalers T-shirt for you there. And this one's green, beautiful green with a white sort of reverse logo there for you too. So check out all of those shirts then and more at oldschoolshirts.com. And we've got a promo code for you there, of course, as well. And that's the promo code GOODSEATS. Oldschoolshirts.com, promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases there. So you have no excuse not to check out any of those great sites to get your WHA on, so to speak. And hopefully that'll get you all set for our great conversation with the wonderful Howard Baldwin coming right up. Yours is a magical story, right? And luckily encompassed in your autobiography. But, because it touches on the WHA and the founding of that and your early days in hockey, that's certainly something we really love to sort of dig deeper into. And we've had some interesting conversations around the WHA. I've had some not yet aired chats with Dennis Murphy, who's got more than a few things to say still about the WHA.
That's good.
Yes, and I look forward to completing those and getting those out there because Lord knows he's got plenty of other exploits that we want to tackle before we get them all onto the air. But maybe you can regale our audience a bit, especially those who are unfamiliar, say, with your Hollywood work or, frankly, your previous lives, how you kind of got into the hockey business altogether. And maybe it kind of steers you back to your childhood days and how you were thinking about what you wanted to do for a living as you were growing up.
I mean, when you're growing up, you're young, you don't really think about much. You just take one day at a time. But, I always would love to have played sports at a higher level and it just wasn't quite good enough. So I said, okay, the next best thing is going to work for a team. So that's what I did. I started with the Flyers in their minor league team, the Jersey Devils, for 1 year. And then when they started playing in the NHL, I went over there and became their ticket manager and then their ticket and sales manager. So I really started at the bottom, had a wonderful experience there. Ed Snyder, the owner, was wonderful to me, as were the other folks there. And that was like my college degree in sports. I learned a lot. Front office.
What was it about hockey, though? What was it about hockey that drew your interest in the first place?
Yeah, because, we were on skates like Canadian kids, or we were from New York, but we skated when we could walk. My dad was a great college player, so he had us on skates very early age, and I just loved the sport.
Yeah, how did you talk your way into minor league and then into the Flyers thing? So it really just didn't fall in your lap, right? It sounds like a little bit of hustle and
you had to hustle. You had to hustle. A friend of my dad's worked at J.P. Morgan and actually was a lending officer, a senior lending officer there, and he put together a couple of deals for teams. He did the Eagles deal and he did the Jack Kent Cooke deal, and then Cooke hired to come out to L.A., and I actually spoke to Jack Kent Cooke. I was going to go out to L.A. to work, and then Putnam left fairly quickly, as I gather a lot of people did with Cooke. And so he left fairly quickly. He came back to the East Coast and went down to Philadelphia to run the Flyers and join their expansion effort with Ed Snyder and Jerry Wallman. And so as soon as he shifted, he was my relationship into that world. So he said, Howard, come on down here. We'll start you at the bottom. And I was fortunate. I had a networking friend of a friend, so to speak. And he gave me my shot. And once you get in the door, if you do things reasonably well, you can hopefully stay there.
So this is circa '67, right? The great expansion of the almost the doubling of the size of the NHL with Philadelphia, right?
That's right. But when they had gotten their franchise by the time I was talking to Putnam. So I knew they had their franchise. So there was no mystery there. The mystery was what to do with me for a year before the team really started gearing up. That's why I went to the Jersey Devils operation in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which was the old Slapshot League, Johnstown Jets and Clinton Comets and Long Island Ducks, and it was a wild, crazy league. Slapshot was tame compared to what really went on in that league.
Yeah, the more people we talk to around hockey, they almost seem like it's almost like a documentary, that movie, in a sort of strange and odd way.
Yeah, that's right. That's what the league was. Definitely.
So you're doing the minor league thing. You're obviously connected to the Flyers franchise, and you obviously move up into the ticket managing thing. So what is it about this sport of hockey? Is it sports generally? Is it the excitement? Is it the entertainment value? The in arena experience? Is it the sport itself? What's really clicking with you? Because obviously, getting a sense of that as you get into your WHA experience, which is a whole sort of thing I want to get into. What's driving sort of your interest and your passion for this so far?
Well, the passion was, first of all, to work in professional sports. I wouldn't kid you. If somebody came along and said, here's a position with a football team or a baseball team, I probably would have jumped at it. It just so happened to have been a hockey opportunity. So I jumped at it. Fit me best because I knew the sport best as far as actually playing it. But I never was involved in the playing end of the business. I was involved in the sales and marketing and that end of the business. So it was a passion to be around professional sports, and that's what I loved.
All right, so you were the Flyers, and I got to think that's a heady experience, especially with the NHL expanding and obviously, arguably rather late relative to the other leagues that were sort of embracing national expansion and sort of seeing the bigger opportunities ahead. So why would you leave the Flyers given that sort of relatively new and exciting opportunity? Maybe you can walk us through a little bit of this World Hockey Association thing. When did this hit your radar? And how the hell did you even get involved in all of this craziness? Because you could make the argument that having just gotten to the NHL and getting your feet wet, Well,
yeah, you're right. I mean, it was. I had been with the Flyers for like 3.5, 4 years, and I just knew instinctively it was time to move on and try to make my next step. Front offices were very small then, so there was not a lot of room for growth. And so, as much as I loved being around the team, I knew that it was. I don't know, instinctively, it just seemed like the right time to take the next step. And so I took a risky step and left and moved to Massachusetts. I did some consulting work in Philadelphia for the former president of the Flyers for like 3 months, and then just wanted to see, what was going to happen next. You're young. I was only like 26, 25, and you just say something will fall into my lap or I'll get something going. I guess I was too stupid to realize that I took a hell of a risk.
So you didn't have a job when you moved back to Massachusetts. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
What did you think was going to happen, or what did you kind of want to perhaps will to happen? No idea. No idea. That's the fun of going down a trail. You go down, you take a journey, and you see what happens. All right, so how does this journey then wend its way into this World Hockey Association? Walk us through a little bit of that. And I guess this guy named Bob Schmertz is in the midst of all this too. How does this WHA thing come to your understanding, and how do you give us some sense of how that came about?
Sure. Read a little article in the Boston Globe about a new league being formed. Being a sports fan, I was well aware of the American Football League and the American Basketball Association. So I just figured, okay, I read about the WHA. I said, maybe there's an opportunity here. So I found the number of the league office, which is out here in Orange County. Dennis Murphy, he's the first guy I spoke to. And he asked me some questions, and I asked him some questions, and he said, well, we'd love to have a franchise in New England, so let me fly back there and meet with you. And I had a partner, John Coburn, who was the same age I was. We grew up together. And we just, right from that point, we started, there's no other way to put it, but winging it. And Dennis flew in, we met. I think he felt, in fact, I know he felt that, well, these two young guys have family money, and therefore they probably will be able to pull all this together. And they weren't so wrong on the money end of it, but they weren't giving anything to us. So it was up to us to sink or swim on this venture. So we just then got into it. and thank God I had a little experience, a little contact with some sport, NHL people, because I had been in the league and, kept my eyes and ears open. But, we began the process of first of all, finding a place to play, which was not easy, and then securing the capital. We got the capital, frankly, after we were awarded the franchise.
You're kidding.
Nope. We begged, borrowed, and we begged, borrowed the down payment for the franchise and the first year or first payment of league dues, and said, now we're really in trouble. We got to raise the money. And we had heard about Bob Schmertz because it was in the newspaper that he owned 25% of the Portland Trail Blazers. And there was an article in the New York Times about him wanting to buy a team in the Canadian Football League for Yankee Stadium. So we reached out to Bob, just somewhat blindly. And he said, sure, I'll meet with you guys. He had never seen a hockey game. He barely knew what it was. And we set up a meeting. We did the deal in a half an hour with him. He flew to Massachusetts. And we instinctively liked him, and I think he liked us. And I think he felt, he had a lot of money then. And he just said, there's no downside. If they can make it work, it could be a really good upside. And it turned out we were probably one of the better financed teams because of Bob the first couple of years.
All right. Well, before we go any further, with all due respect, Howard, who's hustling who here, right? Because we've talked.
We're all hustling each other.
Yeah. Okay. Well, explain that a little bit, because we have yet to air our conversations with Dennis on a lot of this, but we have explored a bit on sort of the the battle of the models, I guess, for sports endeavors, whether it be sort of a central control kind of process or this sort of franchise thing, and obviously the world of Dennis Murphy produced endeavors, right, is very much of a franchise kind of model, and arguably a little House of Cards-ish if it's not played right, and certainly played out in the early 70s. How are you? I don't know. It seems like you must have had the gift of gab. And or the ability to sort of sell the idea to lots of different people. And I'm just really curious as to how all that comes together without maybe a lot of scrutiny or just, frankly, seat of your pants kind of luck.
Well, it was so different then. And the people that founded the league, Dennis and Gary, they were hell-bent on putting 12 franchises together. So, they never wanted to look too deep, because they needed 12 in order to kick off the league. And, and believe me, those first few years, really right up until the end of the WHA, everybody always circled around each other at every turn, making sure, well, is this guy going to be able to last? And there was never a doubt about us once we got in Bob Schmertz. And that happened pretty quickly. But it was a hustle. There's no question about it. Dennis and Gary were hustling us, and if they tell you anything different, they're full of it. And we were hustling them and saying, oh, we got this and we got that, just feeling like we'll find a way to put it together. And we did. If you look at all the changes, even in the first year, before the puck even dropped, there were 4 or 5 franchise changes. Miami, San Francisco, Dayton went to Houston.
Los Angeles?
No, I think L.A. played there the first year.
Oh, fair enough, right.
Yeah, but they were moving around like checkerboards. Philadelphia went to Vancouver. It was a little crazy, but so was the ABA. It's just the way it was, you could no more pull something like that off today in a billion years.
All right. Well, so tell me about where you found a place to play and what was the sort of the thinking, because Boston, not unlike New York, I guess at the time, not an easy place to find, shall we say, top tier and available places to play of the certain scale, I guess, that the WHA was trying to do in competition with the NHL. How did you go about finding a place to play and sort of rooting this franchise in its first year of the WHA?
The first place we looked was Providence because we knew they were building an arena there, 11,000-seat brand new arena. But again, these were the days of, I don't know, good old boys club, and Providence had an American League team there, and the owner of the team had been in Providence forever, so they weren't going to let anybody come in. They were making sure that this building was available. They ended up getting in a lot of trouble for it, so they kept us out. Then
I'm sorry, was Providence because Boston didn't have any opportunities for you?
No. We looked at Providence first. Because we felt Boston had the Boston Braves in the AHL, and they had the Celtics, of course, and they had the Bruins, and the Bruins were riding high. So we figured, let's go to Providence. It's New England. It's hockey country. And so that's where we first tried to get in. And, we were being blocked at every turn. So we then met a lawyer named Phil David Fine, who was the architect of the first stadium that was built for the New England Patriots. And it was a powerhouse in Boston in sports and law. And it's actually, again, one of those twists of fate. We were actually on a plane going down to the league meeting to get the franchise. And he sat behind us on the plane, and I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, you're the kids that are trying to get a hockey franchise." I said, "Yep." And I said, "We could use some help for a place to play." And he said, "If you get that franchise, you call me up, and I'll get you a place to play." And that's what happened. He knew the Bruins, and he knew that antitrust-wise they couldn't completely keep you out. So he got on board, and we got the franchise. I called him up and said, "Okay, I did my thing," and then he did his thing. And if you may not know it, but the first year we only played like 21 games in the Garden, and we played 19 in the old Boston Arena.
Yeah, and how did that go with the fans? Right? Do they kind of remember? How did you get them to go to the right place? Because sharing
that wasn't hard.
Oh, okay,
but you could certainly, if we played at the Garden, we knew we'd do 8,000 to 10,000 people a game. We played at the Boston Arena, we did 3,000 or 4,000 people a game. Believe me, there was a dramatic difference in each arena.
How did you find yourselves? So how did you find yourselves marketing this team, given that you were in Boston? And maybe share with us what lengths did the Bruins and/or the NHL go, or maybe not go, to making your life more challenging, shall we say, in your first couple of years in town?
Well, two different wars. The Bruins actually were fine. They were so powerful, and hockey was at such a high point there that they didn't, they just figured we'd fold. And so they never really, they knew that we were playing in their building and they're making money off of us. And they gave us dates like Monday night and, Friday afternoon. I mean, they were crazy dates. The NHL, of course, they did everything they could to discredit us. And as we signed players from them, they would try to scurry around and sign them back. It was just a war. And we were competing for markets. Then if you look at your history book, they went. What's fascinating is you went in 1967 from 6 teams, and then if you look from 1974, you had 26 teams. You had an NHL that was up to, I think, 14, and you had a WHA at 12. It was crazy. And what people don't realize, 26 teams, okay, that's 20 more than the original 6. Every team has 30 to 40 players under contract. Do the math. You were reaching anywhere for players. And it got very competitive. But it opened it up, too. It opened it up to Europe. It opened it up to some of the behind the Iron Curtain countries. And opened it up to Americans before the WHA. There was just a tiny handful of Americans that played in the NHL.
And you had a lot of Americans that very first year, right? Which
yeah, I think we were almost 45%, 50% American.
Right, which kind of novel for the time across both leagues, no?
No question. We had an American coach, Jack Kelly.
And not only that, but you also won the championship the first year. I mean, how did you go about putting that team together? And how much, I mean, was it just dumb luck that you wound up doing so well, or was this kind of a meticulous and well thought out plan, or something in between?
Well, Jack Kelly was the GM. He gets all the credit for what happened on the ice. And he built the team that some guys built the team where they would go from one extreme to the other. And they'd have a couple of star players, and then they would sort of go for upper echelon AHL players or bottom tier NHL. Jack really went for some 5 or 6 up and coming good young NHL players: Tommy Webster, Ricky Lee, Jimmy Dory, Brad Selwood, Al Smith, all guys in their low to mid 20s. And then he filled in with some solid citizen, like AHL players like a Bruce Landon, Teddy Green he got from the Bruins, and then some top-line college players. That's the way he built that team, and he built it right.
How did the fans take to you? I mean, obviously you're...
they were great. First year we did great. I mean, we led the league and everything. We won everything. We won the championship. We won everything. And then the second year, obviously, it changed. The bloom was off the rose, as they say. The second year is always harder than the first, and the novelty wears off.
And what was it about the second year? Was it the repeat thing? Was it and also probably the seeds of your, shall we say, consternation with the arena's situation in Boston too? Because the second year we were all in the Garden. They opened up and gave us 41 dates or 38, whatever the number of games was. And then that's what made it interesting, because, we had 38 dates in the Garden. But it almost like it had reached a saturation point with the Bruins and the Braves doing so well, now the Whalers. And the demand for it just, we knew, the smartest thing we knew is we knew by November of that second year, we were in a precarious position. And that's where, we immediately heard about Hartford and their new arena, and we went down there and made a deal quickly, because we just knew the bloom was off the rose in Boston, and they were tapped out vis-a-vis 4 prime tenants in one building. Did you guys ever play either the Braves or the Bruins in any kind of exhibition game? I'm sure there was a lust by the WHA to kind of play and try to prove their wares, but no. Nope.
Never did. Not till we did the merger.
Very interesting. All right. Well, so who romances who with this Hartford Civic Center, right? Is it them looking for you, or you them? How does that kind of get broached?
We were both.
And maybe the path how you got there, because you didn't immediately go there, right? You had to take a couple of detours into Springfield for a little while too.
Nope, that's not quite right. What happened is, once Bob Schwartz and I said, I think we should be looking for a better place. I read in the New York Times, one of the newspapers, that the Hartford Civic Center was being built, and the negotiations with the guy, you may remember this name, Charlie Finley, broke off. And how disappointed the building manager's name was Bill Lillyman, and they needed a prime tenant. And I called up literally that day, and he said, oh my God, come on down, let's meet. To show you how much we knew about Hartford, we chartered a plane from Boston to Hartford. And we actually crash landed in the Brainerd Airport. We landed the wrong way in them. I don't like to fly. And I told the guy, go home. We're going to drive home. Well, we drove home quicker than it took us to fly down there. It was such a short. But anyway, we went in and we met with Lillyman, and he had a fellow from Aetna Life and Casualty, one of their senior executives, a great guy, Don Conrad. We made a deal within an hour. We shook hands on a deal to move the team there, and closed the deal within 3 months. Couldn't do that kind of stuff these days, right?
And you were the primary tenant there in that new facility.
Yes, sir. Huh? Yeah, and where Springfield comes in is we finished the regular season in Boston. But they knew we were moving, so they were mad, And so we played the playoffs at the Big E in Springfield. And then we started the following season, which was our third season.
This is 75, right? Yep.
Yeah, we started that season in the new building Let me get that right. No, it was still at the Big E. We started the third season at the Big E, and then we shifted over to Hartford. I think it was right around January 10th or 11th of '75 for the first game at Hartford.
And what was the reaction of Hartford? It seems like that was kind of a love affair from first sight,
Lights out,
first drop of the puck.
Lights out, day one, full buildings. We had some teams, particularly the early years in the NHL, where we weren't good, and we never went below 75% paid capacity.
So even though you'd won the championship that first year, you're still embraced by Hartford. And I guess it's sort of these I wouldn't call a small town per se, right? But it's certainly you become the first love because you're the literally the only professional game in town, and embracing Hartford and all of the New England region versus sort of being the number 2 or 3 or even 4, 10 in Boston.
It was fantastic from day one. We were the only show in town. We were in the right place at the right time. The people were wonderful. There was a great spirit between the corporate community, the state, and the city. And it worked. And it really never didn't work. We had some lean years in the early 80s because the team was bad. But again, they still supported the team. It was a terrific marketplace. Well,
by all accounts, it seems like the Whalers were, if not certainly one of the small group of model franchises for the WHA. So obviously that's a testament to your skill or naivete or something, some combination thereof. So why would you say, in your estimation, and we'll get into your league duties as we sort of get into this, but how come more people weren't following your blueprint, so to speak? Was it just bad luck or situation or ownership issues, or why were you the exception more than the rule, so to speak?
Not every market is the same. Winnipeg always did well. Edmonton did well. Quebec did well. And we did well. And then you had teams that just didn't have, the market wasn't quite. Cincinnati had great ownership. And wanted to get in the NHL, but the NHL didn't want them. Same with Houston. Birmingham was always marginal. Indianapolis marginal. And I'm trying to think of Chicago. You had another team. You just wasn't going to work in Chicago at that period of time. And so but there were certain WHA markets that did very well. The 4 I mentioned. And frankly, I think Cincinnati would have done really well if they'd gotten in. And Houston would have done well. But the league wanted to take 4. And so we had to, shrink the league down. That's all there was to it.
All right, time for me to catch my breath, get a cool, tasty beverage, and remind you, while we do so, that our friends at Audible are here to remind you that you can get a free audiobook download of your choice from over 180,000 titles. If you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats and use that link, of course, to try for yourself a free audiobook on us, gratis, if you will. And you will love the idea of audiobooks. It's an awesome way to kill time and occupy and stimulate your mind, perhaps when your eyes are busy doing something else. And of course, there are plenty of interesting books to be found, especially in the world of sports and sports history. And I think our audience might enjoy a few of these, of course, including the seminal work by baseball legend Jim Bouton. It's called Ball 4. It is not only written, but it's also narrated by him. You could use your free credit for that book. And of course, as you know, Ball 4 centers around the 1969 one-year wonder that is the Seattle Pilots of Major League Baseball, but obviously the background for a whole lot of other observations about the sport of baseball. And it remains to this day perhaps one of the most celebrated writings about the sport of baseball in this country. Of course, you can also, if you're not a big baseball fan, you can go into the world of soccer with the autobiography called My Turn by Johan Cruyff, the late Johan Cruyff, perhaps one of the world's best ever soccer players. He of Dutch heritage, of course. Plenty of great legendary years at club play as well as national team play. for the Dutch team, as well as, for our audience, maybe a little bit of interest, his journeys in the North American Soccer League in the late 70s and early 80s with the Washington Diplomats and the Los Angeles Aztecs. And of course, if you're into football, there's probably no better book, especially if you find yourself really interested in the sort of deep and rich history of the NFL, with the book called NFL Football, A History of America's New National Pastime. It is written by Richard Crepeau and narrated by Marlon May. That, too, is an audiobook that you could choose from over, like I said, 180,000 titles. There's got to be something in there that's going to be of interest to you. And by all means, give it a try. And we appreciate your doing so at audibletrial.com/goodseats. And again, you're going to get your free audiobook download. You can cancel it anytime. And again, even if you cancel it, you can keep that book as long as your device exists. So again, we appreciate it. Give it a try. audibletrial.com/goodseats. And now, back to our conversation. So walk me into sort of how you become more involved in the actual full-on league, right? Did you literally become sort of the senior executive and or the president of the league over those years?
The first year, which is the end of the fourth or end of the fifth year in the WHA, we had our first attempt at the merger. And a guy named Bill DeWitt, he owns the St. Louis Cardinals now. Billy and I sort of led the charge. And we failed, but we knew then our mission had to be to get a merger done. And so that was the way we were moving forward. And the other guys in the league knew this. And so they felt, okay, I wasn't day-to-day running the league. We had somebody that did that, but I was like the president of the league. And my role for the league was to obviously franchise stability, but it really was primarily to make sure a merger happened. And that was my focus, and I spent a lot of time on it.
How did that merger conversation early on start to occur? Who's reaching out to whom? Who's sort of brokering those conversations and relationships? Because obviously out in the public, right, there's no love lost between these two entities.
No, but behind the scenes, we did what we had to do to get meetings. The first go round were all in Montreal because that's where they had almost all their meetings, and it sort of it thawed the relationship out, the meetings. I mean, they realized that, okay, these guys have some merits, and we realized that these guys aren't quite the bad guys. We all knew each other. I mean, Ed Snyder was, with the Flyers, he's one of my closest friends ever. So it wasn't as if we were strangers with each other. We just had different viewpoints.
Well, I got to think the NHL, though, was also just apoplectic about the rising salaries that the WHA was bringing.
They were, but there were guys in that league like Harold Ballard and the Boston people and the Vancouver people and some of the old guard. They weren't going to let us in no matter what. So we failed the first time. We struck out. And then we sort of looked at each other and said, okay, what are we going to do? Because we need this merger. We knew we weren't going to last forever. So that's when we went back and attacked our game plan, become underage juniors. And, Johnny Bassett in Birmingham signed all those kids, and Billy DeWitt signed Mark Messier, and we went after the kids. And we went after stars, too. I sat with Rod Gilbert in the Etno office with the CFO of the Etno, offering him $175,000 a year for 5 years, praying he wouldn't take it. And he didn't, thank God. We just were going to get him and kick him in the you-know-what, because we had to get him to the table. And my mandate from my partners, because we had solid ownership, remember, I had some of the biggest corporations in the world as my partners now. Because Schmertz got out in the corporate community of Connecticut. Hartford came in. And their mandate to me was get in the NHL. We'll put the money up, get us in there. So that became my mission.
How did you bring the league owners into this conversation? And maybe at the same time, how do you, I don't know, maybe not so gently kind of make your priority list versus some of the other franchises that maybe you just knew would never make that crossover into a league if there ever was a merger?
everybody knew what I was doing. And they all wanted me to do it because, yes, you're right. There were guys that knew they'd never get in, but they knew they'd be bought out. And so they could, like Johnny got $2.5 million out of Birmingham for not going in. Billy DeWitt got $4 million for not going in. Others got less. So they all knew that this was their way to either get something for their efforts, or in the case of the 3 Canadian cities and Hartford, this was the way to get in the NHL.
And how does it finally come into being, and how do you circle on the teams that did go? I think it seems pretty obvious. The Canadian franchises, right? Because that's pretty uncharted territory for the NHL. How do you make that call, and how do you get, how does Cincinnati not make the last cut and all that kind of stuff?
Okay, it became pretty easy because it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we knew, the league in its 5th, 6th, 7th year was struggling. And franchises were dropping, and we didn't prop them up. We didn't try to move them because we knew at the end of the day we wanted to do a merger. At the end of the first go-round, we were advised by the league, the NHL, hire the law firm of Proskauer, which is a terrific antitrust law firm, and let's start using them as a go-between between the two leagues to make this happen. And that's what we did. And so it was, we thought at one point we might have had 6 teams go in, with Cincinnati and Houston going in. And actually we voted in June and then voted out in August because the Hawks rallied the troops and won the day. But we just knew that no matter what, there were certain teams that just weren't going to make it. So if it came that they'd come to us and say, look, we can either move, fold, but we're not putting any more money in, we'd say, okay, here's $500,000 and give us full releases, we'll divide up your players, and that's the end of it. And the last year, I think we were down to like 6 teams. 6 teams. What's the matter with me?
So your levers then, right, were the sort of the twin sort of threats, I guess, of deep pockets, right? Arguably not necessarily full and real per se, but at least the perception, right, of big spending to keep the salaries inflated, and the NHL didn't like that. But also this antitrust thing, right, which seems to be like the sickle sort of over the head of the NHL.
That they were a super cautious league when it came to that. That's why if you look in the history books, they never called it a merger. They always called it the 79 expansion. And so that theoretically, if you legally, the WHA went out of business and then 4 WHA teams went into the NHL. You look it up, it was never called a merger in any of the announcements from anybody.
How did you feel once that agreement was done? Did you feel that you could immediately compete with the NHL and then some? Certainly Hartford could, right?
Do you mean on the ice?
Yeah, well, both on the ice and as legitimate, entities and businesses within this new established league, or not new established.
Yeah,
league.
I think the 4 teams felt that we would be really solid financial partners within the league. I think on the ice, remember, they stripped us down pretty good. They said you could keep 2 skaters and 2 goalkeepers, and the rest went to the NHL if they had a claim. In other words, if we had a certain player that we had on our team, if he wasn't one of the 4 protected and he had been drafted by Detroit could claim him. You follow me?
Yeah,
and then they did have an expansion draft, but I put that in quotes. So, but we were competitive from day one. We actually made the playoffs our first year, and so we were never an embarrassment to them. And it was a pretty good expansion. It was a pretty well thought out plan.
At what point, though, did you, so obviously Hartford still probably I'm guessing was kind of the smallest media market, right? When all things being equal?
Without a question, we were the smallest market in the league, in the smallest building.
And did that not matter in the early years? I mean, was this sort of like the Green Bay Packers do well of the league, or what?
Yeah, they referred to it a lot like that, but smallest market, smallest building, yet we had the third, fourth highest gross in the league at the gate. We just had a good market. It was nice to be the only show in town. And then if you sell out, you can get a good competitive price for your tickets, and everything then was in tickets. Very little in television and all the crap they have now. It was all in tickets. So if you did good with the tickets, you were going to do well.
Well, you did something really well there, right? Because we had the Whaler guys on a couple of months ago. These guys who are still clinging to the hope that the Whalers franchise can return to Hartford. But my God, it is still to this day, right? As you well know, right? I think the merchandise of all the defunct or no longer around teams. The Hartford Whalers still punches above its weight in terms of merchandise sales, and there's still that sort of lore and that love of that team in New England, and in particular in Hartford and the state of Connecticut for that Whalers franchise. It's pretty amazing.
You're right about the merch, and yeah, it became like a cult franchise. I never should have moved, but again, we really did do all the things from a marketing, community relations standpoint. We had a great front office team, and the players got fed into it. Players liked playing there because most of them were from smaller Canadian towns, and it had a nice feel to Hartford. People liked to play there. I'm sure in this day and age it would be different, but then it was a nice place to play. And the team became part of the fabric of the society there. Everybody knew that's the only show in town. This was your identity. This was the identity for Hartford. It was the identity for Connecticut, really. Connecticut's a funny state. You have Fairfield County, which is pretty much the bedroom community of New York City. But then you have the rest of the state. And they just embraced this team like you rarely see. You did a good analogy. Green Bay Packers is a good analogy.
Yeah, it's not Boston, it's not New York, it's us. It's different. We've got it.
Absolutely.
That's part of the halo that still exists. So, all right, before we get off the WHA and this period of time in the 70s, so a couple of quickies. So, number one, you say in your book, it's a great little in the prologue about as your film career in the later years came on that. You want to tell a little story that you mentioned in the book about, I guess it was during the Academy Awards night, right? Was there a special something that you were wearing that harkens back to this franchise that night?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first year we won the Avco, and we had the beautiful rings. So for good luck.
And for our audience, the Avco was the Avco Cup, which was the name, right, the title sponsor, if you will, almost ahead of its time of the championship cup. For the
and so I figure, okay, we're going. The best picture is a big deal. So my wife Karen and I are sitting there in the audience with that ring on for good luck. Otherwise, I'd never wear it. It's too big and bulky. And sitting with Adam Sandler right next to us, and we chatted away. You're held captive for 4 hours, and talking about the ring and hockey. He's a big hockey fan, and saying, well, I'm wearing it for good luck. And, of course, they announced the big picture, or the best picture, we don't win. And he said, well, you should, excuse my language, but you better get rid of that ring. But still in all, it was good.
Well, let's put it there. You still won a couple Academy Awards for that movie, Ray, which was an awesome film.
Yeah.
I think some of the luck rubbed up. But it does speak to, and I think most Whalers fans can appreciate, right? There's that special thing, and that sort of still lasts today, and I think that's pretty telling, given that was sort of your first real taste of professional sports.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't help but have a great deal of love for what happened there in the 70s and 80s. It was a special time with a special franchise, and it'll always be like a cult franchise. And unfortunately, it's not there now, but it doesn't take away from what was done when we were there.
All right. Well, before we go off the 70s, I want to ask you about this little detour that I see your name attached to, depending on where you look, either attached to or not attached to, and that is this little thing called the World Football League and the New York Stars. How much or how little were you involved with that? I know Mr. Schmertz was, to an extent, right?
I started out, I figured, okay, I'm in Boston, so I figured they're going to start the league, and so I took the Boston franchise. And
so I'm sorry. So you were going to be a New England franchise participant in this World Football League that I guess Murphy was part of too, right?
Dennis wasn't. Gary was.
Gary, right? Gary Davidson. Yep.
Davidson. And I actually, we had a team name. We hired a really well-known coach and GM, but I really quickly realized I was in way over my head. I had to keep the Whalers. That was my first obligation, just to make sure that worked. So I said to Bob Schmertz, who was totally supportive of what I was doing, I said, Bob, let me sell this team, and we'll take our front office, because he hadn't done anything. He had the New York Stars. I said, let's bring Babe Parilli and the GM and a few of the staff down to New York. They can run your team, and I'll help you from afar to get it going. And that's what we did. So, and then the New York Stars, I helped them for like the first year. But really, the biggest thing I did for him there is to make sure he could unload it, because it was a money pit, a real money pit. And sadly, that league did not work at all. And Bob, then we got Upton Bell, who was a great guy, great character, and he took the team off of Bob's hands and moved it down to Charlotte.
Yes, we had a great conversation with Upton last summer, and some very we did, and some very interesting stories as to how he circled on Charlotte, and obviously having had his cup of coffee with the New England Patriots prior, and his desire to kind of get back into the game and stuff, and I think it's lost on a lot of historians, right, who follow this stuff like we do, right, that the Charlotte Hornets actually, were the New York Stars prior to that, but literally were actually, even though they never really played, the Boston. I guess they were called the Bulldogs. Then he shortened it to Bulls. Was that the name? Was going to be the team?
No. He's actually, the Boston Bulls were sold to a guy that operated in Portland, Oregon. Upton bought the New York Stars.
Right.
But he had the Boston front office. He had Babe Parilli and this girl named Dusty Rhodes, and they were running it for I don't think Dusty went down there because Upton was a general manager. But that's what went to Charlotte. It was Schmertz's enterprise that went to Charlotte.
Got it.
The Boston team went to Portland.
Interesting. Well, even that is even convoluted. It's just, but when did you know that the WFL was not only not for you, but maybe just not for long for this world? Or did you not see that till later on?
I saw it within a few months. It just didn't feel right. It felt like it was built from the top down. And I just had a bad feeling about it. And I was lucky to get out when I did. And I'm really glad I got Bob out when he did. But it just didn't feel right, and I had no great, I love to watch the sport, but I had no great feel for the sport, I wasn't involved in the culture of the sport, and just never felt right. I don't know how else to put it.
Well, all right, so you got back into hockey. How did you, how did you wend your way back into the, into the sport? I mean, the Penguins of the 1990s, right, which is sort of your next sort of really, major, sports involvement, right? That was nothing short of magical too, at least until the end of that decade. Though, what was it about the sport of hockey? Was it because of your experiences, and you said, "Hey, this is something I know," and now maybe helped engineer the original Challenger League, you had kind of made a run at the Penguins earlier in your career,
sort of. But what happened? When we left the Whalers in '88, and I had just started in the film, and my wife, Karen, was acting, and she was doing well. So we moved to L.A. and worked in the business. And within a year, I got a call from John Ziegler, who was the president of the league, saying, we'd like to expand. L.A. just did the Gretzky deal. Hockey seemed to be exploding in the at that time, and particularly out west. And so they said, it's time to get more markets. So he said, why don't you find us a market on the West Coast? And I said, okay, let's establish a $50 million benchmark price. So we did. We did the San Jose deal. Lots of people realize or don't realize we were technically the first owners of San Jose for about 20 minutes, but we were. And because we put the whole deal together, and then the Guns, who own Minnesota, decided, hey, we're having trouble in Minnesota. We want that market. So the solution was we go to Minnesota and the Guns go to San Jose, and we didn't want to be in Minnesota. We stayed there for about 2 months and left. And it was when we moved back to L.A. that I got a call from Mr. DiBartolo Sr., and he said, you know, I watched, you've done a couple of these deals, and I have to sell the Penguins. Will you help me find a buyer? And I said, let's see what we can do. I spent 7 months trying to get him a buyer to pay a fair price. Nobody would. So we put the deal together ourselves and ended up with the Penguins. But we sort of did it. But when I say by default, I don't mean that as much as by accident. You know what I mean? We took the team on to try to help them and sell it for them, and ended up owning it.
So, okay, let me back up because we've had a couple of conversations on the Minnesota North Stars, and let me get this straight. So, your push towards getting a franchise on the West Coast in San Jose, backhandedly or ultimately, helped you essentially become the owner of Pittsburgh in the early part of the 1990s.
Well, not really. Okay. I mean, one had nothing directly to do with the other.
Right.
San Jose, Minnesota was a transaction, and there it was. But then shortly thereafter, Mr. DiBartolo reached out and asked if I could help him, like a broker.
Got it.
Find a buyer for his franchise. And we did our best, but everybody was trying to buy it on the cheap, and then we put the whole thing together, and we said this could be a good deal for us, and we did it.
And how did you get the money, and how did you rescue that franchise, and then how did you go about running that franchise to get to the point where you made it to the Stanley Cup and won your second title?
Yeah, I mean, I really the money person was a guy named Morris Belsberg, who had done Minnesota with us. And he wanted to get involved, so he was the money person. And look, when we bought the team, we closed it like literally at the opening of the season. So the credit for the Stanley Cup, although we're mighty proud to have our names on it, but that was well on its way of happening, thanks to Craig Patrick and Scotty Bowman and the hockey guys. But it was a big thrill nonetheless. I wouldn't kid you. And the 90s were a terrible time in hockey. The 70s were terrible, and the 90s were terrible. And everybody will tell you that. So we had it for 7 or 8 years. Morris wanted to get out, and we brought in a guy named Roger Marino, and therein lies a story of economic turmoil.
Well, let's hear it. I mean, you think so? All right, was it hockey or the decades and the macroeconomics associated with them? Or both? Well,
I think it was both, really. Certainly in hockey, you had a problem in Canada, and the Canadian dollar was dropping.
True.
So you had like a dollar differential of almost 40 cents on the dollar. So the American teams were subsidizing the Canadian teams, and we sure as hell couldn't afford that. And then you had a lot of change at the NHL because you had Ziegler leaving and Gary Bettman coming in. You had Alan Eagleson leaving and Bob Goodenow coming in. So both sides sort of drove the stake in the ground for a sort of two new sheriffs in town. So, and Gary was right. We really needed stability on the player side. The player salaries were getting out of control again. And so you had a couple of work stoppages during that period of time. You had one right when we were going for the Cup. There was a player strike right at the playoffs, and then there was a work stoppage in 94, 95. that almost blew the season, but it didn't. And that was a turning point for us. We couldn't come back from that economically. We weren't financed well enough to really come back from only playing half a season.
Yeah, but holy cow! Some of the great stars of that era, right, went through Pittsburgh, and you.
Oh, darn right they did. Yeah.
I mean, that must have been a heady time, at least on the ice, when you didn't have to think about.
Oh, it was fun. They were great guys. They were so good. It was fun, but it was, they talk about the Penguins' bankruptcy. We had the ninth best bottom line, if you get what I mean. They do a report every year, and they rank 1 to whatever number of the teams were. I think 21 at the time. We were number 9. So there were teams that were really suffering then. So it was a time of turmoil and having to stabilize it, which Gary did.
Well, so how did it sort of come to an end? I mean, given all the success on the ice, and obviously the dramatic story of Mario Lemieux, and this sort of his health issues and all that. I mean, you had some great success during that time. You had some great crowds and some, but with that, it's sort of the layman's view is how does it? I mean, was it always a challenge? I mean, I know the franchise actually had its financial issues even before you took ownership of the team, and there were threats to possibly leave. I guess back even in the mid '80s, but.
There were that was one of those franchises like St. Louis too. Always had sort of a mark of financial instability to it, and it never changed until they came out of the bankruptcy, and Ron Burkle came in and Mario came in with Ron, and it's been a wonderful franchise since then. I mean, we kept it there. I'm proud of that because we prevented it from moving. Just like we prevented Minnesota from moving, but it was a challenge. But it wasn't just a challenge for Pittsburgh; it was a challenge for 80% of the franchises in the league. It was a tough time because your salaries were just going up, and the revenues weren't going up the way they should be. And so that's where you had to chip away at the collective bargaining agreement. You couldn't do it all at once. And keep making it better and better. And then finally Gary got it straightened away, I think in 2003 or 4. But they lost a whole season in doing it.
Sure. And I also think, too, that it probably it was also just before, I think, really the big television money really started to kick in, right? I mean, cable really sort of coming into its own and being a huge driver, or at least a contributor to league finances beyond just one's individual ability to sell tickets in their own stadium.
No question. Whereas in most of my days, in fact, all my days, tickets was the number one revenue source. Right now, it's television, boxes, sponsorships within the arena. And of course, tickets are important, so don't get me wrong. But you've now got revenue streams that didn't exist before. And you've got a controlled salary structure, so you have a chance to make it. And it took a while to get there. For years in the NHL, the players were screwed. You had a monopoly. You had 6 teams. And then you went to 12, and then the WHA came along. I say to this day, every player in hockey should give 1% of their half a percent to the WHA guys.
All right. Well, so before we get off of hockey, and I want to get to your sort of very final chapter here about what you've been doing since, obviously, being a quite the mover and shaker in Hollywood with not only you but also your wife. What do you make of the Las Vegas Golden Knights and that success story that I don't think, frankly, many people saw coming, or maybe you did? And
I did not.
Oh, I don't think anybody did. And how about Seattle going for $500 million? I mean, are we at peak NHL now, or
I don't think we're at peak at all. I think they got great room for growth. I didn't see Vegas. I think they've done such a brilliant job in Vegas. Seattle, I think, is going to be an extraordinary success story. It's always been a strong market way back in the days of the old Western League. And you've got an amazing ownership team there with Bonderman and Jerry Bruckheimer, Tim Leiweke. It's going to be a great, they'll be in the top 10 within a very short period of time. It's a terrific market.
Well, so is Houston, though, right? Quebec certainly wants to back in. I mean, we're also, I think, now to get macroeconomic here, but we're also sort of near, I don't know, perhaps near the end of a cycle. I don't know. We'll see how long it goes. But, we've sort of been in a 10, 12-year cycle of relatively inexpensive money and all of that. And you wonder when there's a shock to the economic system, whether 32 NHL teams or, however many there are in the NFL. I mean, it seems like there are so many teams and leagues and franchises out there that you wonder how far the entertainment dollar can stretch in America.
We got to look at each league separately. The NFL is a league unto itself. You only have 8 games at home, and you play them on a Sunday, so you can really ratchet up, can't you? 8 games, come on. We got 41 home games in hockey. So, and in baseball, you have 81, and in basketball, you have 41. So it's a much more complex business model. And there aren't, you're running out of markets. But at the same time, as long as you have revenue streams that continue to grow, distribution, whether it be through the internet or whether it be through cable or whether it be through overseas, that's where the values are going up. It's product, not unlike film, not unlike TV. Hockey and sports are product. And look, if you do a game, let's just say it's a Penguin game, okay? And they do a game on TV, it's about 3 hours for the game. Then you have a half-hour pre and a half-hour post. I'm not so crazy on that, right? So that's 4 hours. And then they run it 2 more times. So that's 12 hours of programming for one game for a regional network. So it's very good programming. And I think we all lose sight of the fact that okay, so we in hockey don't get the national revenue quite the way the others do, though Gary's got it going up there. We also have great regional deals. And you combine the two, and hockey's doing pretty damn well. And then you look at the future, and you say, well, what'll happen in the future? Look, within 5 to 10 years, there's no question in my mind these leagues are going to be expanding to Europe and overseas. No question. So there's great growth ahead. There's great opportunity, ahead. Now, sometimes every league. I mean, last 3 years, the NFL moved 3 teams. They moved Oakland, they moved San Diego, and they moved the Rams in the NFL. So you're always going to have franchise movement from, maybe every 5 to 10 years. But I don't know. I think it's a good time for sports.
You mentioned international, right? So one last question on hockey, right? Do I have this right? You had part ownership of the old Soviet Red Army team back in the day?
Yeah, in the mid-90s. That was great fun.
What was that all about? And was that did that also sort of lead you into some doings around the KHL in Russia, which is arguably the second best sort of league out there in the world?
Yeah, no, we don't have anything to do with the KHL. We were involved with the Cska Red Army team for a couple of years, and we did it because we felt it would give us an edge in the marketplace, and we thought it was a good business venture because the walls were coming down, the barriers were coming down. We thought economically we could make money there, and the second year we were. It was really working, and then it got a little dangerous, so we pulled out.
Very interesting. Well, all right. Well, let's sort of round third base here, and how do you? And it's all laid out very nicely in your book, and which I will highly recommend, and we will tout both at the beginning and the end of the show. How do you go from being sort of this hockey guru and this sports entrepreneur success a couple of times over? How do you make the move into Hollywood and motion picture production and all that kind of stuff? Seems like it's a completely different and foreign world than from your successes on the ice, shall we say?
Yeah, well, I mean, we segued into it, as it says in the book, through a friend, and we put a little money up for a script that we developed, and it got made, which is probably unfortunate. If it hadn't, we might have saved a lot of money. And one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden you're in the business, and it was nice because my wife, Karen, was acting, And then she started writing and producing. Together we do that. And it's fun because every project is a separate business unto itself. And so that if you get a movie, I'm trying to think of something, Mystery Alaska, Sudden Death, it's very intense for a year and a half or two, and you get it made, and then bingo, you're on to the next one. And we still do it. We're still active. We're starting a movie right now in 3 days in New York that we're going back for.
You want to give our audience a little hint?
Oh, we get a lot of the hockey pictures. So it's a small hockey picture called Odd Man Rush, written by a young man that went to Harvard in mid-2000. And he was a good player, not a great player, but he had the dream to play. And it's sort of like Slapshot meets, it's just a nice journey that this young man is on to try to fulfill his dream of becoming a professional player. And he goes to Europe and a bunch of different teams, and it's a good story. And it's not a big movie; it's a smaller movie, but it's going to be good.
Well, you can take the hockey out of the man, but you can't take the man out of hockey, I guess, or whatever that. So
yeah, whatever that means.
Whatever that means. Well, I guess you know what I mean. But so, do you ever get the hankering to get back into the hockey game, so to speak, or into sports, or you kind of
no, because I love it. We went up to the All-Star this weekend. It was very kind of the commissioner to invite us. We love seeing the remnants of the people we knew. Most of it's all new, but it's such a different business now. I mean, these guys have budgets of $170 million a year, and it's become a big front office. I remember with Ed Snyder when we wrote our book, which you mentioned kindly. I put a picture of the front office, of the first picture, I think, in there. Somewhere in there, you'll see the entire front office on one page in the NHL media guide, because I was so excited when the media guide came out to see my name in print. And the entire front office, including owners, scouts, coaches, was like 17 people. Now, I was saying to Eddie, how many people do you have now with the Flyers? He said, oh, my God, Howard. This is 4 years ago. We have about 170 people. I said, good Lord Almighty. So it's way more complex. It's not a business that I should be running at all. I had my time. I loved it and cared deeply about it, but on to different things.
Well, look, we encourage our audience to get Slim and None, and again, we'll talk about it at the top of the bottom of the show. But it's a tremendous story. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't call it rags to riches, right? You sort of start from sort of, being poor by any means. So, but the idea of sort of where you came from and how to, go from running, a hockey franchise and successfully and then into Hollywood. I mean, it's almost like kind of a little Walter Mitty or almost, pinch me kind of moment, though, right?
A little bit, Tim. You're right. I mean, that's a nice way to describe it. It's just a question of, if you have a passion for something, and if you're a young person starting out and you see something you really want to do and you love it, go for it. Don't let anybody talk you out of it, because you're only young once. It doesn't mean you'll succeed. Listen, we've had our knocks, but at least you're following. Tom, you know who Tom Rich is? The agent, great guy, great friend, represented Mario and a lot of great players. And I remember once having a drink with Tom, and we looked at each other and said, geez, if we had gone and discovered a computer chip or widgets or something, we'd be rich. But we followed our passion, and we've had fun. And that's what it is.
Well, okie dokie then. There you go. A great chat with our new friend Howard Baldwin, live and exclusive from Los Angeles. And we appreciate him taking time to go back into the Wayback Machine and talking about the early days of his very interesting career and life story. Starting back with the old World Hockey Association and the New England Whalers. And as you heard, this is a team that still lives on, even though it's not been on the ice in Hartford for decades now. And it's clearly something special. And what a great way to kick off an amazing professional career winning the championship in the WHA, that's a heady experience right there. But then going on to win as the owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Stanley Cup in the NHL, boy, oh boy, that's hard to achieve. And then winning some Academy Awards as a film producer. I mean, it's just, that's an amazing arc of success and what a story that is. And you will find all of that story and more in his very fine autobiography by Howard Baldwin called Slim and None, My Wild Ride from the WHA to the NHL and all the way to Hollywood. It is a fantastic read. It is published by the House of Ansansi Press. Came out in late 2014. You will find a link to it and all of its 320 some odd pages on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with Howard Baldwin and you will find a convenient link to this book on Amazon. You can also get the Kindle version there as well. And by doing so, you'll get a couple of shekels our way to keep our lights on and the heat going to keep this show up and running. And we appreciate your doing so. And of course, you'll find all of our old episodes and links to the books and other media that we refer to on our website as well. Again, it's goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll find all of our social media links. Let's see, at Twitter, we're at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. There's a Facebook page devoted to us as well. You can send us some email. There's a link there, but you can send it to us directly at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And let's see what else. We want to thank our friends at Podfly Productions, as always, podfly.net, and our good pal Jerry Payne, who puts all of our pieces together editorially and does a really smash-up job for us each and every week and puts up with us. We appreciate that. And we also appreciate you going to any of the places that you download or find this show or stream it, whatever you do, however you find us. If you would be so kind to give us some ratings and some reviews. We like as many stars as possible and a couple of nice little words of praise. We'll take that. Your constructive criticism too. No, why not? But if you can rate and review us wherever you can, that'll help our algorithms and get us found and discovered by other fans and friends similar to you who might similarly enjoy the proceedings that we do each and every week here on the show. So we appreciate you doing that, and we appreciate you listening, of course, as always. And until next week, we wish you a fond farewell, and we'll see you then.